Ahead this hour, we'll be joined by Diamondbacks third baseman Evan Longoria. But let's begin with the Mets' presumptive third baseman, Carlos Correa. The contract issues between the Mets and Correa's camp have yet to be resolved. And some new information, courtesy Andy Martino, who covers the New York Mets for SNY. Source, Mets, quote, very frustrated, unquote, with Carlos Correa talks, now considering walking away. All right, they agreed to the big contract in mid-December, and obviously we are still here. We've yet to have the introductory news conference. Joel, get us up to speed. What do you know?
Yeah, look, Flo, I think both sides are trying to remain quiet on this because there is a lot at stake. Nobody wants to say anything that could get thrown into a grievance in case this thing goes out of sorts. I will say that I believe very much that Carlos Correa would like to be a Met and that the Mets would like to have Carlos Correa. That often leads to a marriage, but the complications here are simple. He has a 12-year, $315 million agreement with the Mets. He wants to preserve all of it or as much of it as possible as a guarantee.
Yes.
The Mets, from their physical, like the Giants, from their physical, have concerns. It seems it is about his lower right leg. He fractured his ankle in 2014 at single A ball. He has a plate in that ankle. There seems to be some long-term concern about the integrity of that leg. And what the Mets would like to do is to protect themselves. Can we shorten it? Can we put in language where you have to be healthy, etc., to get all the money? And I would say we keep thinking of these two parties, and they are the most vital two parties. But there are two more parties involved, Major League Baseball and the Players Association. Yeah. No contract becomes official until those two entities bless them. And the Players Association will be very concerned about lowering the value of any contract that exists. So will they okay something that might work for Correa but might be a bad precedent for the next 10, 15 guys who are in this situation? MLB, are they in the business right now doing favors for a guy whose payroll is going to be about $380 million?
Also
like,
true.
are they going to just okay anything along the way? There are complications to two sides that want to make a deal, and it seems at this point there's at least a game of chicken going on. Hey, the Correa camp, we've got other teams, the Twins, etc. The Mets will walk away. You know, SNY's guy is saying that. So to me, you know, like, is that chicken? Because there will be a stare down where someone will back down and the Mets will guarantee more or Correa will accept less in guarantees. That's the game of chicken going on right now.
Ron, do you have a sense of which party needs the other more?
Well, I mean, from outside, I feel like Correa needs the Mets more than the Mets need Correa. Now, the Mets, if they sign this player, then they've had an A-plus kind of offseason and put themselves right in the talk or the mix of being one of the powerhouse teams in the game. If they don't, then yes, they did have a successful offseason, but certainly not if they don't add this fantastic shortstop who will play third base for them. You know, just looking at it from afar, now, there's some reality in it as far as the frustration of the Mets. I'm sure there's some reality on other teams that would be interested. But it seems more like posturing, you know, by both sides and trying to start this thing where they wanted it to be quiet. It's a very complicated, convoluted process because you're talking about things that you haven't talked about with this kind of contract, this length, over this long period of time with a superstar player. Yeah. So it's going to be interested. If this is going to get done, it seems like there might be 1,000 steps that have to get done. We're on 400.
And lawyers are going to have to accept this in the building of the Mets,
that's right,
in Correa's camp, in the Players Association, in MLB. I will say this. I agree with Ron. I think Correa is in the more dire, if you want to use that situation. He would have a second major market team tell him physically they do not believe in his physicality to exist through this. He'd have to go back out into the wild. Can they get someone else? He's a very talented player. I will say that the Mets want the player, Steve Cohen wants the player for a very specific reason. The Mets spent a ton of money this offseason, but that was to bring back Brandon Nimmo, to bring back Edwin Diaz, and to take care of 3 starting pitchers who left, right? DeGrom leaves, Taijuan Walker leaves, Chris Bassett. They got 3 starters, Quintana, Senge, and mostly Justin Verlander. in Steve Cohn's mind, we're even with last year, and that wasn't good enough to outdo Atlanta. This is what outdoes Atlanta and Philadelphia. So he does want the player. The question is, how much will he gamble with so much already in guaranteed money? He clearly wants less. The Mets clearly want to guarantee less and make him earn more in this.
Okay. Now, you, Joel, brought up a couple of good points, specifically maybe some contracts that we can see maybe a possible pathway for what a future deal with Correa and the Mets might look like.
So what I did, Flo, is obviously the Mets and the Boris Correa camp are not talking very much here. So I called up other agents, and I said, if this was your guy, what would you do? And the one that came up the most is, I'm going to use two here. One is Yusei Kikuchi, and the other is Julio Rodriguez. They're both deals with the Mariners. I'm starting with Kikuchi to some degree, because that is a Scott Boras contract. And, you know, don't get blown away with the bells and whistles. The key element I want to just show here is this is a 3-year contract. Then the player has a chance like, oh, I could just pick up an option, or the team could pick up essentially 4 one-year options. In other words, there is an ability for the player to turn it into a 4-year contract. There's an ability for the team to get out after 4 years. There's an ability for the team to make it a 7-year contract. Depending on a player, they had some questions coming from Japan. How will this translate here? Seattle then takes that essential structure, and it's not that different from what they ultimately do in a big deal with Julio Rodriguez. And I bring up the big deal with Julio Rodriguez because ultimately the final number for Correa is going to be a lot closer to Julio Rodriguez than is not a Scott Boras client, than it is going to be to Kikuchi. And again, you could just see how a player could get to a certain number, like there's a big guarantee here, $209.3 million. But then there's another way to get to bigger numbers, but the player in some way has to earn it, right? Like if he wins Silver Slugger, gets certain All-Stars, etc., it goes up. So if you think about it, like, could the Mets and Correa agree, hey, if you're an All-Star, if you win the Gold Glove, if you win the Silver Slugger, or simply do you stay off the injured list for a lower leg injury, lower right leg injury for 15 days, 20 days, 25? I'm sure this is all the gymnastics that's being gone through. And again, these were agents who are not involved in this negotiation. And I'm simply using this to say that these are probably the kind of gymnastics that are being going through right now to see if the two sides could agree to a structure that works. Again, understanding. Correa wants to guarantee as much money as possible. The Mets want as much protection as possible.
Well, and what's interesting, Ron, is like the gymnastics that Joel is talking about. Even if the two sides agree, as he mentioned, the Players Association and the league have to sign off on these gymnastics to get it cleared.
Well, you would think that both sides, and probably more the Mets side than the Scott Boras side, are pushing things through, asking questions, and presenting that to league lawyers and other people.
Absolutely
to think,
going on.
You know, is this something that we can do? Oh, we can't do that. We do this. From the player's point of view, there is no doubt that Carlos Correa could go out there and get the exact same contract he got from the Minnesota Twins last year. A 3-year deal, over $100 million with an opt-out. But when you're a superstar player, you base your entire career not only in performance, a path to the Hall of Fame at some point, but, pardon the pun, the bite at the apple.
Yeah.
You know, you want that one bite at the apple. And right now, the context of Correa and the Mets in 2023, this is his chance at the bite at the apple. And if it doesn't work out here, I don't know if he gets it from anyone else.
You know, I'll throw this in. You know, Scott Boras created the pillow contract, right? That was something he created. The Kikuchi contract was his kind of concept, and we've seen it now repeated in other places. Again, talking to other agents, they say Scott is probably working on the injured superstar contract, right? Like to use as a prototype moving forward for someone who might be in this situation. And the question becomes, is that a structure that the Mets can believe in, the Players Association could believe in, and MLB could believe in?
Right.
This is two sides want this to happen, but this is not uncomplicated. There's a lot of math. There's a lot of ego, there's a lot of rules, and there's always fear of precedent. And that's all in play here.
Last question for you, Joel, and this is pure speculation. If this does go sideways, do you have a sense of what team or teams might jump into this at the last hour?
So I look at the Twins. To Ron's point, they did do a deal with him last year and passed him on a physical, which means they did that. This offseason were believed to be at about 10 years and $275 million. Could the Twins believe in our marketplace, we have found it very difficult to attract this level of free agent? Do we have to kind of close our eyes, our ears, etc., and pass him on this physical? Because essentially we can't get this kind of player to Minnesota, who's kind of like the pure free agent without any questions. So maybe the Twins are willing to do what the Giants or the Mets aren't. But to Ron's point, I bet you there's 5-8 teams still that would be like, oh, you'll do a 3-year contract with an opt-out after each year?
That sounds good to us.
Okay, we'll find that in our budget.
Yeah. All right, so definitely stay tuned and keep it here. We've got you covered for any of the latest news involving Carlos Correa and the New York